Hare Krishna. Welcome to another evening in Lives of the Vaishnavacharyas. I'm your host, Chaturatma Das. I want to thank everyone for joining us. We have quite a number of people here in the chat room this evening. Very happy to have you with us. I want to thank you all for joining us week after week, and what's become month after month, and actually has now become year after year, and encouraging us for this program. It's a wonderful opportunity to try and absorb ourselves and remember the lives of the great acharyas that have come before us and have paved the way for us in Krishna consciousness, particularly as this program is related to the associates of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. It's of course still just getting to be a little dark here. It's recently turned to the daylight savings times. I don't know about where any of you are, but it's kind of weird, daylight savings time, and it's still 40 degrees here in Alachua. So if we're at 40, I'm sure some of you are much colder. We got started pretty much on time, although we had a bit of a scare, not knowing if we were going to be able to do it. As we came into the recording studio, we had two bats. Bats as in flapping around wing kind, not baseball or cricket kind. And flapping around the room, and we opened the door and got them out, and then as we were setting up, a third bat emerged from the ceiling, and so we had that one flying around. And we may have a fourth one. We may have a family of bats there, so if sometime during the broadcast you see me dive for the floor, it's only out of fear being attacked by bats. I'm sure they're not vampire bats or anything like that. This is true stuff. You can't make this up. I'm telling you. Hare Krishna. All right. So, of course, we want to thank our host, Krishna.com, for providing us with the studio, even though it has some bats in it. And we want to encourage the devotees that, the devotees and volunteers here at Krishna.com are doing a lot of very, very wonderful service. And it's very nice if you're able to support them, give some kind of assistance. You can go to krishna.com/donate, and if you're able to give anything to help support them, then that'd be very nice. We wanted to talk tonight something about the nature of the associates of the Lord. We have very many various associates of the Lord, and generally these associates fall into that which we would call primary and that which we would call secondary. Now, this is the wonderful nature of the spiritual world. The spiritual world is completely free of envy. There is no envious nature. So, what we find is that no one is aspiring, I want something more than where I'm at. Material world means that I'm envious of someone else and I want what they have. I want some position, I want some prestige, I want some particular, acknowledgement. I want to move up the chain. There's that wonderful story when Srila Prabhupada was first going to Dai Nippon publishers in Japan to get his books printed. And he was in a large room with all the heads of the company, and they were all there, and they all came and presented Prabhupada with their business cards. Very, very formal Japanese business mood. And the youngest of the men stayed back, and Prabhupada spoke with him a little bit. So Srila Prabhupada said to the young man, he said, what is your goal? And the young man took his business card from the bottom of the stack of business cards which had been presented to Srila Prabhupada by all the different managers of the company, and put it on the top and touched it with his finger, kind of snapped it like that. This is my goal. To be the big man, to be the leader of the company. So this is the nature of the material world. The spiritual world is completely devoid of this. The flowers, the grass, the cows, the cowherd boys, the gopis, the parents, the elderly servants, none of them are thinking, I want this position or that position, I want to go here, I want to go there. That's just, it's, completely non-existent. So, what we find is that no one is aspiring, I want something more than where I'm at. Material world means that I'm envious of someone else and I want what they have. I want some position, I want some prestige, I want some particular, acknowledgement. I want to move up the chain. There's that wonderful story when Srila Prabhupada was first going to Dai Nippon publishers in Japan. And he was in a large room with all the heads of the company, and they were all there, and they all came and presented Prabhupada with their business cards. And the youngest of the men stayed back, and Prabhupada spoke with him a little bit. So, with that in mind, where do we get the idea of secondary and primary? It's not even an issue, actually, because the nature of the Lord is that he fills the heart of his sincere devotee and pleases that devotee's desire so fully that the devotee is completely satisfied. There's no room left in the heart of that devotee for hankering and desiring profit and distinction and, better position. They're completely satisfied. I mean, when the cowherd boys and Krishna are all out at lunch and Krishna's in the middle of the cowherd boys and they're all eating their yogurt and fruits and different kind of little snacks that the mothers send with them, each cowherd boy is thinking, Krishna's looking just at me. And Krishna's giving his full attention to me. And they're totally satisfied in that. And during the Rasa Leela, we know the Bhagavatam describes that each one of the gopis thought Krishna is dancing exclusively with me. So Krishna so much satisfies and fills the heart, mind, and soul of the devotee that the devotee simply thinks the Lord is here only for me. But the nature of the Lord is that he can do many things at one time. He's very clever. And he's able to satisfy all of his devotees because he's unlimited. So, in this way, every devotee is satisfied and none of them are hankering. So even though we may have what we would describe for our, as I've used the word many times, linear concept of life and of the world, primary devotees, Rupa, Sanatan, the Panchatattva like that, and secondary devotees, some that are maybe not as directly, intimately, or deeply involved. It's really just a matter of words. So tonight we're going to speak about a couple of these so-called secondary devotees. Now, I was thinking about meditation. Meditation, this means something that we fix our mind on. Something that we absorb our thought process in. And it's a very big subject these days. We have all kinds of workshops and seminars and etc., all these training courses and all for teaching people how to meditate. Even in the secular world, human resources discuss the possibilities of meditation with people and meditation to help resolve personal conflict and so on and so on like this. It's the type of thing that has become very comfortable for people to speak about. Now, working in the secular world, many of you out there, I know, have the same scenario that I do, where you have to hold some type of a job. So working in the secular world means that we come to know those we work with to some greater or lesser degree. And they come to know us and certain details about us. And the knowledge that we share with them is going to be, more or less depending upon what the nature of our relationship is with the individuals that we're working with, how deep the friendships go like that. So, in my particular workplace, many of the co-workers, matter of fact, almost everyone there know that I'm a Hare Krishna devotee. But I have to say honestly that very few of them have even the most remote idea what that means. And I'm quite happy to leave it that way for the majority of the people that I work with. Just whatever they know or don't know, that's fine with me. But one thing that many of them do understand is that I do some kind of meditation. There's some meditation thing involved in my life. So, as devotees, we generally don't think very much of the process of meditation. That's because we associate it with the modern so-called meditation that, is not really what the Bhagavatam would describe a real meditative state to be. Bhagavad Gita even gives even more basic, rudimentary understandings of this. So, but the fact of the matter is that the process of meditation is there very strongly within our minds, within our process, our devotional process. At the beginning of the serving of the deities, there are different stages of meditation and prayer that one absorbs himself in, thinking of the spiritual nature of their body and detaching themselves from the material connections, so to speak, making an endeavor to spiritualize themselves. To this point, there's even a very wonderful description given in the process of deity worship of meditating on Krishna's Vrindavan Leela and the different surrounding things so that we prepare our mind properly like this. This is the real point of meditation. In our own Gaudiya line, we have this type of instruction there from Narottam Das Thakur. Narottam Das Thakur, as we've discussed many times, was the primary individual for introducing Manasa Seva. Manasa means to absorb the mind, to meditate, if you will. That meditation, that process of service by meditation. He brought it to a certain forefront as something that can be done within our process of devotional service. And I know myself and many others in a similar situation where we have deities of our own, and when we travel, those deities go with us, and sometimes there has to be some seva has to be performed in a circumstance where we can't actually bring the deity out, so manasa seva is done. By meditation, one may perform the worship of their Thakurji, of their Istadev, their worshipable Lord. So this type of understanding is what I wanted to discuss tonight. And we actually have one very famous example of this process of meditation that actually predates even Narottam Das Thakur's introduction. But before we go to that, I just want to acknowledge who we're seeing with us in the chat room this evening, and who in their own way are meditating on the pastimes of Lord Chaitanya by this group Sadhu Sangha that we're performing this evening. I see Karuna Shakti and Radha Krishna Devi Dasi are both here. They're some of our very long time listeners and have been with the program for a long time. Manjesh was able to make it tonight. Manjesh, always nice to have you with us. And Bhaktin Carol, another long time listener and follower of this program. Arnel Pineda, new name to me here. And those of you that are out there listening, if you'd like to join the chat room, you're welcome to. And we just encourage everyone to kind of, as you join in, let us know where you're from if you're new, so we can kind of get an idea of where devotees are listening. So, who is it that we're going to speak about tonight? Well, the thought that we had was this one wonderful devotee whose name is Nrsimhananda Brahmacari. Actually, my wife mentioned this to me because when I told her who we were talking about, she said, oh, it's brahmacharis for some reason. And I didn't even think about the fact that they're brahmacharis. But actually, a couple of weeks ago we spoke about the grihastas and the importance of seva like that. So somehow or another it's just taken this direction. Certainly not due to any of my own qualifications in the brahmachari ashram. Those days are long gone. But tonight we're going to start with Nrsimhananda Brahmacari. Nrsimhananda Brahmacari actually was previously known as Pradyumna Brahmacari. And he was considered to be the 13th branch of the tree of Lord Chaitanya's devotional service. And the interesting thing, he was a worshipper of Nrsimhadev. He was very devout in his following of Lord Nrsimhadev, and because of this, Chaitanya Charitamrita explained to us that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu changed his name to Nrsimhananda Brahmacari. It describes in the Antya Leela how he was very, very famous devotee. And he actually is said to have been directly instructed and spoken to by Lord Nrsimhadev, and that Lord Nrsimhadev resided within his heart, and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, understanding this, therefore gave him this name. It mentions that while he was there's a very interesting story about his Pushadam pastimes with the Lord, which we'll get into that in a little bit. But the Gaura Desha Dipika, in addition to the Chaitanya Charitamrita, mentions this, and it mentions that the manifestation of Lord Nrsimhadev in his heart was not only visible or understandable, if you will, by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but by those who were his associates and friends, godbrothers like that. Now there's an interesting mentioned here also in Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Jaiva Dharma. In his book Jaiva Dharma, he happens to mention that Nrsimhananda Brahmacari lived in Nrsimhapali. Now, Nrsimhapali is just near to Sri Mayapur Dham, Navadvip Dham, and it's a very, very wonderful place of Nrsimha's pastimes there. And he resided there, and while residing there, he engaged in the worship and the meditation upon Mahaprabhu and Radha and Krishna. And in this way, he was always protected by Lord Nrsimhadev, having resided at this holy place. Now, there's a very interesting pastime from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where it mentions how Nrsimhananda Brahmacari was offering food, and that he was engaged in this meditation, as I mentioned, on serving the Lord. And after a couple of days of meditating in this manner, Nrsimhananda told Shivananda Sen. Of course, we've mentioned Shivananda Sen, a very senior devotee in the Bengali Gaudiya community. And he said to him, he said, I've already brought Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to the nearby village of Kulia, of Panihati. Excuse me. He said, tomorrow at noon he will leave Panihati and he will come to your home. He said, I want to cook for him. Now, Nrsimhananda Brahmacari was an excellent cook also. It is true that many brahmacharis are very good cooks, partially because they have to cook for themselves, and partially because many of them take that up as their service. So he said, the Lord's going to be leaving Panihati and coming here to Navadvip, so I want to personally cook for him. So I'd like you to bring everything that is needed for such cooking, and in this way I can perform this service. Now, Shivananda Sen, Nrsimhananda Brahmacari addressing, he said, Shivananda Sen, don't doubt my word. Know for a fact, because through Nrsimhananda Brahmacari's meditation, he could understand where the Lord was and what the Lord was engaged in. So he said to Shivananda Sen, he said, don't be doubtful of this. Just assist me in this service. So Shivananda Sen said, all right, perfectly fine. So he said to his associates, his servants, his household servants, he said, bring whatever cooking ingredients Nrsimhananda wants. Arrange for everything that he needs. And then, beginning early the next morning, Nrsimhananda Brahmacari began his cooking. And he cooked many, many different varieties of food, all kinds of vegetables and all kinds of sweet cakes and different types of sweet rice and wide variety of other preparations. So after he finished cooking everything, he brought the separate dishes, because the tradition was to put everything in clay pots, and then he brought all these clay pots forward to Lord Jagannath and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So he separately offered some dishes to Nrsimhadev, who was his own personal deity. So he divided all the food. He had this idea. He'd give some to Jagannath, he'd give some to Nrsimhadev, and he would save the rest and give that to Mahaprabhu. So he divided all the food into 3 different offerings. And then outside the temple, he began to meditate upon the Lord taking this food and enjoying the prasad. And in his meditation, he saw Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu come very quickly and sit down and eat all 3 offerings. Not only the one intended for himself, the one intended for Lord Jagannath, and the one intended for Lord Nrsimhadev. So Pradyumna Brahmacari, who was his name at the time, Pradyumna Brahmacari became overwhelmed in ecstasy on seeing the Lord come by his meditation and take all this prasad. So it mentions that tears began to flow from his eyes, appreciating this ecstatic vision he'd been given. But he was nonetheless a bit distressed. He called out, my dear Lord, what are you doing? You've eaten everyone's food. I know that you're one with Jagannath. Therefore, I have no objection. You eat the prasadam of Lord Jagannath. But why are you eating the offering that I had made to my Nrsimhadev? I think Nrsimhadev should not eat anything today, and therefore he has decided to fast. If the master fast, how can the servant eat? Therefore, I shall also fast. So this was his realization. That Lord Nrsimhadev was his Ishtadev, and Jagannath and Mahaprabhu, they were the same. So you can eat Jagannath Prasad, no problem, but you've eaten Nrsimha's. Now how will Nrsimha is going to fast today, therefore I'm his servant, I'll fast also. Of course, this is the proper mood of the Brahmachari. Prabhupada tells us this way back in the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, that the nature of the Brahmachari is that he would go out and collect all day, and when he came back at night, he would give everything to the spiritual master. And if the spiritual master called him to eat, he would eat. And if the spiritual master didn't call him, then he would fast. No concern one way or the other. So, like that. So, if my master is fasting, then I will also fast. So, it mentions that although Nrsimhananda Brahmacari felt great jubilation to see Mahaprabhu eating everything, for the sake of his Ishtadev, Lord Nrsimhadev, he felt some disappointment. So, of course, we all know Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who expands himself as Jagannath and Nrsimhadev. So there is no difference between any of these forms of the Lord and Mahaprabhu himself. So Pradyumna Brahmachari was very eager to understand this fact. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu revealed it to him by this very practical demonstration. And we see this many times. Mahaprabhu would teach a lesson by doing something very practical and vivid that would stay in the mind of the individual devotee. So when Mahaprabhu came, then he actually did sit down. He took all the prasad. And this was, of course, at the house of Raghava Pandit. And all the different varieties of prasad that were prepared that had not been brought out, he enjoyed all these things. But he saw that Nrsimhananda was not taking anything. So he said to Nrsimhananda, he said, Shivananda mentioned to Nrsimhananda, he said, why are you expressing so much dismay? What is the matter? Nrsimhananda said, just see the behavior of your Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He alone has eaten what was meant for all of the deities. And because of this, both Jagannath and Nrsimhadev are fasting today. Well, Shivananda Sen heard this statement. And he was unsure whether Pradyumna Brahmachari was speaking in this way because of ecstatic love, because Shivananda Sen was accustomed to different devotees experiencing ecstatic love, or because it was actually a fact that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would come and eat in the offering of all three deities. So when Shivananda Sen looked perplexed, then Pradyumna Brahmachari said to him, he said, all right, bring more food. Let me cook again, and I will offer that to my Lord Nrsimhadev. So Shivananda Sen arranged to bring all the different preparations, and again Pradyumna Brahmachari began to cook. And he cooked everything very, very nicely, and then he offered what he had cooked to Nrsimhadev. And in this way, he was very satisfied that Nrsimhadev did eat this offering, and therefore neither of them fasted that day. So one day, the following year, this is 1 year after this event took place, the devotees had all gone to Jagannath Puri for the Rath Yatra. And in the presence of all the other devotees, the Lord began to raise some topics about Nrsimhananda Brahmachari. And he began to praise his transcendental qualities. He said, the Lord said this, he said, last year, now this is how amazing the Lord is. He's remembering very clear. He said, last year, when Nrsimhananda gave me varieties of sweetmeats and vegetables to eat, they were so good that I had never eaten such wonderful tasting preparations before in my life from anyone. The devotees were all struck with wonder to hear that the Lord was doing this. And in this way, Shivananda Sen became more confident that the statement that Nrsimhananda had, that Pradyumna Brahmachari had mentioned, was definitely true. So it mentions that at that time is when the Lord gave him the name Nrsimhananda Brahmacari, because he was always absorbed in the pastimes of serving Lord Nrsimhadev and completely feeling fearless in that way. So I have to say, as we're speaking here, my tech assistant Abai, every little noise we hear, he's looking to the ceiling to see if we have more bats. I'm the only one not looking to the ceiling because I have to look at you all. So we would simply ask that all of you please pray that Nrsimhadev protects us here in the studio, that no more bats come tonight. What's that Prabhupada said? Once, twice, thrice, no more. So we've had 3. Oh my goodness. All right. So Chaitanya Charitamrita goes on to explain that in this way there were certain places the Lord would always manifest, and one of them was in the home of Raghava Pandit when the prasadam was there, and the person that would cook that prasadam many of the times was Nrsimhananda Brahmacari. So there's another pastime given with Nrsimhananda, and this regards Nrsimhananda's meditation again upon serving the Lord. Now, the devotees had come to hear that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was going to go to Vrindavan, that he was going to travel from, I don't remember if it was from Navadvip or if it was from Puri. It must have been from Navadvip. So that the Lord was going to travel, and we've got some input here in the chat room that the bats follow air current and will chase that air current. Okay. Well, then I better stop speaking because I got a lot of hot air. Thank you, Radha Krishna, for that. All right. Back to Nrsimhananda Brahmacari, who was fearless of all bats. I'm not sure we're going to want to post this episode in the archives. All right. So, Lord Chaitanya had arranged that he was going to travel to Vrindavan. Now, what had happened was that the Lord had gained quite a reputation at this time. And everywhere he went, he was followed by hundreds, even thousands of people. And you can imagine, it made things a little awkward, a little uncomfortable, a little difficult to travel with such a large entourage and to try and keep oneself in a simple state of remembering Krishna when there's all these distractions. So, in this way, he decided he would go to Vrindavan. But that he would go to Vrindavan with only a small 1 or 2 devotees. So, Nrsimhananda Brahmacari, who had duly been given this name now, he heard that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was going to go to Vrindavan. So he became very pleased. Now he understood that the roads of travel at that time were not necessarily, I don't know how they compare to today. Many of you had the experience of taking that road from Calcutta to Sri Mayapur Dham. And except for that last section, once you enter the Dham after the railroad tracks, it's a very dangerous road. Many, many accidents there. Similarly, from Vrindavan from Delhi to Vrindavan before they paved it, and many of these things happen. So, in some way, he wanted to make a nice arrangement for the Lord. So Nrsimhananda Brahmacari sat down, and very, very pleasingly, he began to meditate on decorating the road that the Lord would follow. It says that first he contemplated a broad avenue starting from the city of Kulia, and he, not just a large avenue, but a beautifully made one with all types of valuable gemstones lining it, and wonderfully placed soft sand for walking on in it. And upon this, then he had endless beds of flowers, endless beds of soft flowers that one could step on and be very, very comfortable. He then mentally decorated the sides of both roads with bakula trees and champak trees and different types of flowering trees that gave amazingly fragrant flowers and as the breezes came, the breeze brought the aroma of these flowers everywhere. And then at different intervals on either side, he would place different types of lakes that were completely transcendental in nature, filled with swans and bathing ghats with decorated archways and wonderful arrangements and shaded, cooling shade trees around them so that one could be very comfortable from the sun like this. And then around these lakes he constructed jeweled seats and places that one could rest. And he filled the lakes themselves with blossoming lotus flowers of so many different colors. And then around the trees that were surrounding the path and around the trees that were in the lakes, he imagined there would be many different types of chirping birds and kachora birds and cuckoos and all the different types of birds that we read about in the Shastra. And the water that would be in these lakes would be just like nectar when one tasted it. So all of these arrangements, Nrsimhananda Brahmacari engaged in this beautiful meditative state so that the Lord, as he was walking, would experience all this wonderful, just pleasant, pleasing atmosphere. And it mentions that the entire road and all the areas near the road were surcharged with these breezes that carry these aromatic fragrances from the flowers. And he carried on the construction of this road in his mind all the way to Kanai Natashala. And then he was stopped. So he continued his meditation again and tried again to continue. And he wasn't able to. The Lord was going all the way to Vrindavan. Why was he only able to make it this far? So he was completely astonished. He was quite surprised that in his own mind. Now, just so you get an idea, Kanai Natashala it's about 200 miles from Calcutta. So it's not anywhere near being close to Vrindavan. So after thinking of this, he then told the devotees, you can know for a fact that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will not be going to Vrindavan at this time. It's an amazing thing to say. The devotees had all prepared that the Lord would be going. Now, Nrsimhananda Brahmacari was a very great devotee of the Lord. And he had heard that the Lord was going in this way and decided, let me render this service so that the entire journey of the Lord would be very peaceful. And although he was able to construct this very attractive path in his own mind, he was only able to take it as far as Kanai Natashala. So it mentions that the unique thing about this was that even though Nrsimhananda Brahmacari was a poor brahmachari, he had no wealth, he had no great opulence, because he wanted to render this service to the Lord, he was able to do so within his mind. Now, Srila Prabhupada mentions in the purports of the Chaitanya Charitamrita that for the pure devotee, whether one materially constructs a path or constructs a path within the mind, there is no difference. That this is the nature of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That he's appreciative of the sentiment and the heart and the mood with which the devotee renders the service. So this is something we should be very attentive to. What is the nature of our consciousness? What is the nature of our heart as we're rendering our service? Because this determines whether the Lord accepts that service. Bhagavad Gita explains this very clearly. Patra puspam palam toyam yome bhakta prayachati. The Krishna accepts these things, bhakti, as long as there is devotion. So Prabhupada makes this point that it doesn't matter whether there is a real road of jewels and trees, or whether it's just within the mind of the devotee offering that, as long as the mood of devotion is there. And then Prabhupada continues to say that therefore it does not require that one is a very rich man to serve the Lord nicely. It is not mandatory that even the poorest man can equally render service to the Lord in this meditative state of serving like that. So very, very nice. So Chaitanya Charitamrita continues on and says, Nrsimhananda then told all the devotees The Lord will only go to Kanai, not to Shala. And then he will be returning here. All of you may or may not believe this, but you'll come to know it to be true later. This is the amazing thing about Nrsimhananda Brahmacari, is he had this window into the pastimes of the Lord while they were happening, even at some distance away. So, of course, we know from Chaitanya Charitamrita this is exactly what happened, that the Lord did stop there. Actually, he stopped along the way at Ramkeli, and this is where he began his association with Rupa and Sanatana Goswami. Then, of course, he returned back, and the rest of the pastimes so on. So this is one of the wonderful examples we have of genuine meditation, of how one can properly meditate. As Prabhupada said, not some dry meditation upon nothing or upon the void, but upon some tangible service that one renders to the Lord. So, very nice in that way. Now, we mentioned in that, Prabhupada mentioned in that purport about wealth, that one need not be wealthy. Now, of course, wealth, this is something, well, many of us want it. Let's be honest. Many people, many devotees want to become wealthy. I mean, we're told, we're taught, to use the real word, we're indoctrinated that success and wealth will be the actual ticket to happiness in this life. This is how we're raised within this world. This is the influences the material energy gives us by the examples that we see in the secular world. That, we have to do these things to be happy, to be successful. Now, certainly we do require a certain amount of effort to keep body and soul together, as Prabhupada says, according to what our position is in life. But wealth is not always needed. Wealth is not a prerequisite. And we just discussed this one brahmachari, Nrsimhananda Brahmacari. We're going to discuss another brahmachari now, and his name is Suklambar Brahmacari. Suklambar Brahmacari was also among the branches of the tree of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's devotional service. He was a resident of Navadvip during Mahaprabhu's Navadvip Lila, and of course afterwards. And he manifested himself as a poor Brahmin beggar, who simply as a humble Brahmin went door to door begging for his sustenance in this way, like that. Now, although to an ordinary conditioned soul they would look at him and think, oh, this poverty-stricken man, he's so poor, he has nothing, he has no family, he has no belongings, he has no anything. To the transcendental eye, he was very rich because of his deep love for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Actually, Gorgona Desha Dipika, it mentions that Suklambar Brahmacari was previously one of the wives of the Jugnik Brahmanas during Krishna Lila. Now, of course, we remember that during Krishna Lila, Krishna and Balaram sent the cowherd boys to beg Prasadam. And the wives of the Jugnik Brahmanas, they understood that this was the right thing to do, and they gave the prasad to them. So later in his next appearance in the Lord's pastimes, one of the wives took her birth as Suklambar Brahmacari. It mentions in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that without the wealth of love of God, one's life is poverty. This is actually the words of Suklambar Brahmacari. He says that without the wealth of love of God, one's life is poverty-stricken and worthless. I pray to be made a servant, and that you may pay me with the wealth of love of Godhead. Now, Prabhupada mentions also, he gives the example that if you have a servant and you decide not to pay that servant anything, eventually that servant will leave. Actually, in the modern world, very eventually, very quickly. If we don't receive a salary at our job, if we don't receive some support, then immediately we find some other situation, some other position, some other station in life. Suklambar Brahmacari prays to the Lord that my life is poverty-stricken and worthless if I do not have love of Godhead. So let me be your servant, and you pay me in that love of Godhead. So this is a wonderful business proposition. By material standards, this is a loser's deal. But a very wonderful business proposition that, my dear Lord, I will serve you, and the only payment is that you give me love of God. And then I will be very wealthy. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur paraphrases, if you will, Suklambar Brahmacari's statements to Mahaprabhu. And he says, you are my poor servant. This is the Lord speaking. That you are my poor servant, lifetime after lifetime. You have no desire to enter into this world and become the head of a household, the head of a business, the head of a state. Rather, you remain a brahmachari and beg from house to house, making an offering to me of whatever you amass in whatever way it comes. Your vow of celibacy is unbreakable. You are free of the mundane egoism that is prominent in householders and retired householders. So this is an assessment by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati of the Lord's view of those of us in the Grihastha ashram, that we have to deal with the difficulty of mundane egotism, and that we must struggle to give that up. Bhaktisiddhanta continues on speaking as the Lord had spoke to Suklambar, that you are thus factually fixed in the highest state of spiritual life, the highest state of the renounced order. You are a de facto sannyasi, a completely surrendered carrier of the triple staff, because you have successfully engaged everything, your body, mind, and speech, in my service. I pray constantly for your offerings, because you have no interest in enjoying the fruits of anything that is not offered to me first. So, in this way, Suklambar Brahmacari is glorified by the Lord for his humble and so-called poverty-stricken position, which he has taken up to enhance his mood of surrender and service to the Lord. Now, there's a very, very wonderful story told about, well, actually there are many wonderful stories, because Suklambar Brahmacari's rasa with the Lord had to do with prasadam, as did Nrsimhananda's. So, actually, they were both brahmacharis. The relationship with the Lord was both centered around prasadam. So, when Mahaprabhu first returned from Gaya, he met with all the devotees. And they all met at Suklambar Brahmacari's house. And of course, he had a residence. Now, Sri Vas Pandit had left the banks of the Ganges and was on his way to Suklambar Brahmacari's house, where the Lord had announced that he was going to meet with all the devotees. And so Gadadhar Pandit, he very quickly followed and went to Suklambar's house. And he got there ahead of all the Lord and his associates, and he hid in Suklambar's house, thinking that if he could eavesdrop, he would hear Mahaprabhu discuss some Krishna Katha topics. So it mentions that all of the loving devotees of the Lord, Advaitacharya, Murari, Shriman, and Suklambar, all gathered there, and then Vishrambar appeared on the scene. And it mentions that Gadadhar Pandit Goswami, Sadashiva, Murari, Srivas Pandit, Shriman Pandit, and all the others witnessed the Lord's amazing transformations and amazing transcendental pastimes with Suklambar Brahmacari. So you can just imagine this scene, that some of the devotees are hiding out of sight, just hoping to hear this wonderful conversation, and some of the devotees have actually come along and are seeing it themselves. So very, very nice. Very, very nice. More of the pastimes of Suklambar Brahmacari. We have a new member in our chat room, Faith. We're very happy to have you with us, Faith. Nice to have you join us as we discuss these wonderful pastimes of Suklambar Brahmacari. So, mentions that Suklambar Brahmacari kept his body and soul together by offering and eating the foodstuffs he accumulated by going out and performing Madhukari. Madhukari means just like a honeybee goes to a different flower and collects the honey and then returns back to the hive, that a brahmachari goes to different places and begs and collects whatever alms are given and then returns home with those. So in this way he was always absorbed in the joy of chanting, because while he would be engaged in going from place to place, he was always chanting the holy name of the Lord. Very satisfied, very, very happy in this way. So because of this transcendental state of mind, he never suffered from any feeling of poverty. He never felt that, oh, I'm missing out on this or I don't have that, because he had a very simple, satisfying life, and he had the full fulfillment and satisfaction of the holy names. Now, of course, as we mentioned previously, ignorant people, they would look at him and think, oh, he's just some kind of beggar. But Mahaprabhu, he understood very clearly what type of a devotee he was. One day, Mahaprabhu was sitting, engaged in chanting, and Suklambar Brahmacari happened to come by. And he had slung over his arm his begging bag. He had been out begging, he would hold the bag, Bhiksha, Bhiksha, and someone would give something and put it into the bag like that, and he would go to the next place. So when he saw the Lord and heard that the Lord was chanting, he began to dance in ecstasy, chanting and dancing, like very, very ecstatic in this way. And the Lord was so pleased to see the depth of Suklambar's absorption in the chanting and the deep feeling. So he began to glorify him. And what he did was he reached into Suklambar Brahmacari's begging bag and snatched a few morsels of the dry rice he had been begging. Now, of course, you're not begging cooked rice. You're begging dry rice, because then you'll take that home and cook that. So the Lord reached into his bag and snatched a few grains of that dry rice. Hearing this story, one cannot help but think of the pastime of Sudama Vipra and the Lord being visited by Sudama when he was in Dwarka, and the Lord taking that little bit of chipped flat rice that Sudama brought. So it mentions in the same way the Lord took this rice from the bag of Suklambar Brahmacari and began to eat it, began to enjoy it very nicely. And Suklambar Brahmacari was so much upset that the Lord had taken this, because, when they would give the rice, it was generally, just not the best of quality. They would give that out to someone that came begging. So when these were some broken fragments he'd been carrying around in his bag, and he felt he had committed an offense. He felt, I've now done something wrong for the Lord. So the Lord calmed him down, said that he always ate his devotees' food with great enthusiasm, but that he had no interest in the so-called finest foods that are offered by wealthy men. So the Lord tells him, don't concern yourself, Suklambar. I always take the food of my devotees. These big offerings that are made to me, riches, men, and all, I'm not interested in any of that. So the devotees surrounding, they were very, very delighted to see these amazing pastimes of the Lord and his amazing mercy upon Suklambar Brahmacari. The Lord then said, listen, Suklambar Brahmacari, I reside permanently in your heart. Whatever you eat, I also eat that. When you go on your begging rounds, I accompany you. I have descended to distribute love of God, and you are my servant, lifetime after lifetime. I hereby bestow upon you prema bhakti, which is my very life and soul. So in this way, Suklambar Brahmacari was given this great benediction. Now, there's another time, Chaitanya Bhagavat describes how Mahaprabhu actually once ate cooked food at the home of Suklambar Brahmacari. We've heard how he ate the raw rice from his baking bowl. Now, one time Suklambar Brahmacari, the Lord announced, he said, I wish to go to the home of Suklambar Brahmacari and take my lunch there. And so Suklambar felt a little, nervous. I mean, he was just a humble brahmachari. He didn't have a very opulent or palatial place, and he wasn't a very excellent cook. Didn't know what he was going to be making, and he was a little uncertain. So he went to the devotees. He said, what should I do? What can I make? I'm not, all I go out and do is bake a little rice and eat that each day. So the Lord repeatedly told him, no, I'm definitely coming. It is my desire to come to your house. So the devotees suggested that you just cook the food that you usually cook without, touching anything in any way, and keep everything very clean, and the Lord will be very satisfied. So it mentions on the day of the invitation that when the Lord was coming, Suklambar bathed himself and dressed in his nicest, simple dhoti, and he then lit the stove and put a pot of water on to boil, and then, without putting his hands into the rice or anything, he poured the water into the rice and added a little bit of a plantain tree so that would flavor it. And all this was being done while with great emotion he chanted the names of Krishna, Gopal, Govinda, Vanamali, like this, chanting the holy names and preparing this meal for the Lord. It mentions that at that moment, Lakshmi Devi, the supreme goddess of fortune, the most perfect associate of Lord Vishnu, she blessed the food that was cooked by that devotee, Suklambar Brahmacari. And that when Mahaprabhu came to Suklambar Brahmacari's house and tasted this wonderful rice and the vegetables that had been put in it, he said, this must have been made by the goddess of fortune herself. He praised it repeatedly, saying, in my entire life, I have never eaten such tasty food as this. The devotees, they saw this crying of the Lord and the satisfaction with the prasadam of Suklambar, and they all gloriously called out, Hari, Hari, Hari. Very, very nice like this. So then the devotees, they saw this majestic mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Suklambar Brahmacari, and they began to cry as they watched the Lord very joyfully eating this prasadam. So Chaitanya Bhagavat concludes this story by saying, may all the rich millionaire non-devotees observe the mercy received by this humble beggar brahmachari Suklambar. No one is able to attain the mercy of the Lord through wealth, high birth, or scholarship. The scriptures repeatedly tell us that the Lord is only attracted by the taste of devotion. And of course, the Lord definitely tasted the devotion in the prasadam of Suklambar Brahmacari. There was another time at which the Lord, who was in a very affectionate mood, he was feeling very kindly disposed towards his devotees, he began awarding each of them different benedictions. So Suklambar Brahmacari's turn came, and then he addressed the Lord. And he said, oh, opulent Lord, you know that although I have visited Mathura and many other holy places, I remain very unhappy. Therefore, please award prema bhakti to me, and then I will be free from misery and become happy. And Mahaprabhu looked at him with a very discerning eye, and he said, my dear Suklambar, the jackals also travel from place to place, do they not? Then for me, what is the value of your traveling here and there and going from this place to that place? So the Lord rather sarcastically began to tease him. Upon hearing this, it mentions the Suklambar Brahmacari in great ecstasy on hearing these teasing words of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, fell down at his lotus feet and touched his feet and washed his feet with his own tears. When Suklambar Brahmacari did this, Mahaprabhu smiled very largely and said, all right, so be it. May you attain prema bhakti this very day. And it mentions that Instantly, Suklambar Brahmacari became filled with the ecstasy of love of Godhead. And then in the company of all the bhaktas, Lord Gaurahari, Suklambar Brahmacari, they all sang and danced and chanted the holy names of Sri Hari well into the night. So here we see that one may indeed be poor, one may indeed be a brahmachari or a grihasta. What really is of the essence in the lives of these two devotees is the deep devotion in their heart that they had for their service to the Lord, and that they had in their mood of serving the Lord, both personally and in their own thought process. So we'll finish there for this evening. It's about 9 o'clock. We have successfully absorbed ourselves in the pastimes of the Lord and given up the pastimes of any other types of creatures we were concerned about at the beginning. So if any of you are in our chat room, Keith B. has joined us and Varani has also joined us. If you have any questions or anything you'd like to ask, Manjesh, you've always got something to add if you'd like to throw something in. We just hope that each of you will take these opportunities as they're presented every other Monday night and try and take them with you to the following Monday. Share these with your friends. This is the whole process of absorbing ourselves in Krishna consciousness, is to share it with others. And particularly the association of devotees are able to best appreciate these pastimes of the Lord and His associates. So those of you that see devotees throughout the day, talk about these different individuals. Speak about the activities of Nrsimhananda meditating on this beautiful road he made for the Lord. Talk about the humility and simpleness of Suklambar Brahmacari as he simply begged whatever he was able to get, So, and use this to motivate your service. Radha Krishna Devi Dasi is mentioning here how she's going to think of these pastimes as she cooks for the Lord. I happen to know her from Facebook, and she does a lot of prasadam cooking there in her temple. And the devotees will be very fortunate to get the taste of her prasadam if she's able to absorb herself so much like this in these pastimes of these two wonderful cooks, Nrsimhananda Brahmacari and Suklambar Brahmacari. All right, so that's it. We wrap up another episode of Lives of the Vaishnavacharyas. Did we post some new shows recently? Everybody seems to be happy with the new shows we posted.
Yeah, we did.
All right, well, we'll keep those shows coming. We've got 50-something shows on tape, and so we'll get them out as we're able to. And we want to thank all of you once again for your support, for your encouragement. We want to encourage you to help support Krishna.com, krishna.com/donate with whatever you're able to do. And before we go, we have a question here. Post picture of tonight's experiment. Thank you, Radha Krishna. She'll post pictures of what she offers to the Lord later. Aiden is asking, is Prema Bhakti achieved by Lord Gauranga's associates attainable? Is the Prema Bhakti achieved by Lord Chaitanya's associates attainable or comparable to what's possible for us in Kali Yuga? Well, Prabhu, these devotees, whether they were in Kali Yuga or whether they were, of course Kali Yuga was still going on while the Lord was here, that's why he came, but whether they were in the direct pastimes of the Lord or whether they're in the direct pastimes of the Lord's expanded society of ISKCON and the Vaishnava communities, the mercy of the Lord is still available to us. It is only as I mentioned before, only our decrepit linear concept of life that thinks that we're separated from the Lord. If we live in a temple, we see the Lord every day. If we're chanting the holy name, we're associating with the Lord every day. If we're taking prasad, we're tasting the Lord every day. So yes, we can experience this type of devotional ecstasy. And I'm sure that if you talk with devotees, every devotee has some time in their life, more than one probably, that they can tell you where they actually felt the presence of the Lord and enjoyed some type of wonderful ecstatic activity. So I would say most certainly Prema Bhakti can be achieved. Now the question is, how long will we allow it to manifest itself in our heart? And that is determined by how much we keep ourselves in that association and how much we let the influence of the material energy impact us. So these are things to think about. Krishna consciousness is there for us. Prabhupada said the only thing stopping us is ourselves. We can be as Krishna conscious as we want to, or as Krishna conscious as we don't want to, or as un-Krishna conscious as we don't want to. So there we go. All right. Thank you very much. Once again, not next Monday, but the following Monday, we'll see you again for another episode in the Lives of the Vaishnavacharyas. Hare Krishna.